Hey everybody, welcome to this month's question of the month. I'm David Keil, of course, and if you've got a question you want me to answer it here, go to yoganatomy.com/my question and I'll answer it for you. This month's question comes from Georgia Collins. Hello David, thank you so much for all your wonderful yoga articles and information. Firstly, they are greatly appreciated. You're welcome. I have been practicing Mysore style for a few years now, and my teacher has moved me on through second series up to Ekapada at my furthest point. Although after a break, I am only going up to Dhanurasana currently. So a little break from practice. I have never been able to bind on my own in Supta Kurmasana or Pasasana, which I struggle with daily. Although I can stand up from my dropbacks on my own, I feel like an imposter doing poses because there feels like there must be something I am doing wrong. I cannot squat very low either, so my transition back from Bhujapadasana and Supta Kurmasana does not go through a good TT Basana, although I do my best. I'm sure you do. I can jump back but have to put my feet on the floor during the transition. I just wondered if you know of other people with these binding problems and if you could offer me any advice at all. Of course, Georgia, I will offer you advice. There's a few things that are mixed together in here. It's not just the lift and jump part. I'm not sure I understand how the squat's connected to that, but I'm going to put it aside anyway. When it comes to lifting up and jumping back, proportions are always something that we should pay attention to. If you have short arms, long femur, or long torso, that can make it a little bit more difficult and more complicated. And certainly Pasasana is a very difficult posture to bind in. The other thing, to keep in mind is relative to, how big your thighs are relative to the length of your arm can have an impact on that. How deep you get your armpit to your knee as you go in will affect how much that arm rotates. And binding, so there's two things. One is the possibility of just proportions, bone length. Number two being how tightly you get your torso to your knee, let's say in Pasasana, or your armpit on the outside of that knee. The more gap you have, the harder it's going to be to do the binding, which, if we bring that back to Kurmasana, or Supta Kurmasana rather, also, if your knees are falling out too much while you're trying to bind, they're going to make it harder. Your knees have to squeeze in a little bit, right? That sometimes it's just a matter of a couple of inch difference. And either there's in a different way, but a couple of inches difference that makes your arm further away from the other hand that is trying to bind to. Supta Kurmasana, complicated posture to get into here. And then of course there's also the possibility that it is a matter of flexibility in terms of literal rotation at the shoulder joint, which you're going to have the shoulder rotation, and then you're going to have a scapular movement on top of that. So these two combine together in these types of bindings, just to keep that in mind. The other thing that connects these two postures together is kind of what I mentioned, but I'll say it a different way, which is I mentioned how far you get your armpit or your torso to your knee. What we're really talking about here is hip flexion. And Kurmasana and Supta Kurmasana, Kurmasana, very deep hip flexion. In fact, in my book, Functional Anatomy of Yoga, it's kind of like beyond normal flexion in the sense that it's deeper than a regular Paschimottanasana because you're putting your torso through your legs. So the amount of hip flexion you have, and when you do Pasasana in this squat, it's also deep hip flexion. So there might be something there. And it's not going to be just your hamstrings, because when you're in Pasasana, the hamstrings are really out of the game because you bent your knee as well. So So take a look for that. So one, there's of course there's proportions. There's the flexibility of internal rotation, how much you can internally rotate the shoulder joint, and then how much your shoulder blade moves along with it. All good pieces to look at, and you should be working on each one of these as you make your way in. And then last but not least is that hip flexion, the depth to which you get your armpit torso to your knee. All right, I hope that helps. Anybody else, if you got a question, go to yoganatomy.com/my question, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.